And we envision a world really where communities, societies can become more prosperous, fairer, and better governed, safer, healthier, and environmentally more sustainable. I mean, at the end of the day, our job is really to make people's lives better. And we do this by achieving our mission through some really core values of integrity, responsibility, excellence in the work that we do with the clients that we serve, and global citizenship, ensuring that we're really, engaging with those global multilaterals. DI's work is really divided among different practices or technical services. We have digital acceleration, where we look to digital solutions to support development outcomes. We have global health, where the practice that I work in, sustainable business development, which is really around corporate social responsibility and working with the private sector for development outcomes. Energy, environment, economic growth and policy development, governance, and really working in some thorny, fragile states, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, so very difficult sort of post-conflict areas. We serve a number of clients, principally, I would say where my work intersects, it's really with USAID, the World Bank, and the UK's Department for International Development. In my work, I support and lead the director of the Global Health Security Practice Area. And global health security is now something that we can't really escape, given that we're all in a COVID, pandemic scenario, waiting for our vaccines and, fully digitally involved in all of our work across the world. But global health security really is about the security of people within the US, and ensuring that they're able to, infectious disease threats don't actually enter our borders, but also how we're working to support countries and lower middle income countries and how they're able to achieve their own health security objectives. Most of this is governed by international frameworks like the World Health Organization's International Health Regulation. The sort of foundational element to global health security is really this idea of the One Health approach. And I don't know if any of you have heard of this, but this is sort of the respect and understanding that a healthy population of people really requires healthy animals and the healthy environments in which we live. As we see, and this is a great example of a young child in Ethiopia, snuggling a chicken, and when chickens and poultry become people's livelihood, and you see how close people interact with domesticated animals like poultry and livestock, and then as we think about the sort of interactions that we play in wildlife encroachment areas, where we're actually working on the margins and seeing where animals and humans, livestock, animals and wildlife are all interacting and creating sort of really plausible pathways for disease emergence. I mean, we are in a COVID scenario today because of an infectious disease threat that originated in an animal population and then spilled over into humans. The One Health approach has been used for many years, and the work that I do really focuses on leveraging multi-sectoral coordination to achieve better, more optimal outcomes. And I do this now actually working in a very wicked area of antimicrobial resistance. And this is a graphic that I really like because it shows how, how reliant we are as human beings to the world in which we live. So this example here, you can see humans on the left side who are, of course, recipients of antibiotics in food and food production systems and livestock production. And then you see it transmitting, moving over into humans. So as that happens, there's pathways between animals and the food production systems and humans where antibiotic bacteria can transmit very easily. On the right side, you actually even see where wildlife interface with companion animals like dogs, and then dogs being a vector that can sort of infect humans. And then, of course, all of the excrement and agricultural waste that ends up going into the land has implications for the water that we drink and the fish that we eat. And also, I would say, having worked now in AMR for the last few years and applying this One Health multi-sectoral approach of animal, human, and environment, I probably will never eat fish, farmed fished products again, especially not from lower middle income countries where you can see that there's, and even in our country, a lot of unregulated over and misuse of antibiotics in fish production. So really, why is this important? Who really cares? Well, there's a lot of information now and data that's showing, approximately 700,000 people in 2016, when this report came out, were likely, and it's a sort of underestimate, had mortality related to antibiotic resistant infections in hospital sites. If antibiotic resistance continues on pace, and we don't see new vaccines and new therapeutics and new antibiotics being developed, there is a projection that by 2050, 10 million deaths per year will be a result of antibiotic resistant bacteria. And that surpasses where we are today with cancer. So put that into perspective. And so, of course, to orient this work and to get people excited about it, to talk to our donors and to organize our actual development outcomes, we kind of look at our work with respect to the Sustainable Development Goals, which I assume you are all familiar with. And the way we look at it is, there are many different areas where we can directly reverse gains that were made, or indirectly reverse gains that were made by not addressing the threat of antibiotic resistance. So why does this even matter? So the programs I have now, I'm working in Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and Nigeria. And these are some of the most populated countries in the world. And we're trying to talk to them while they're dealing with malaria and HIV and TB and now COVID. We're trying to talk to them about antimicrobial resistance. Really hard to get their attention. But at the center of the sort of development of a program life cycle is really the results. And I think what I've seen throughout my career, my 13, 14 years at DAI, is that if we're not really thinking about the sort of project life cycle with, learning, collaboration, and learning, and adaptation, we're not really thinking about the problem in a way that will have sustainable impact. We're not thinking about, the levers that we can draw on to enact, policy change and really make sure that we are, making an impact. And so I like this graphic because I think it's important to see that, as a project is designed, you go from, if you look at the sort of red circle, you see, results, of course, in the center, collaboration, learning, and adaptation, which is pivotal to, being able to develop and generate good results. But you have to design programs that are agile and flexible and really understand monitoring, evaluation, and learning, and how communications experts can actually take the learnings that we have and communicate those results to beneficiaries and to other stakeholders. So when I reflect back on my career, and these are actual notebooks because I just had to clean up my office because now we are in COVID and no longer will have an office. I went back and I thought, what have I learned in terms of where we could have done a better job with the communications experts I've worked with? Now, I'm not an advocacy expert. I work very closely with a lot of advocacy and policy advocacy communication experts and knowledge management and communication experts who are all, coming at this from different perspectives. But the takeaway that I can share with you all is that if you are considering a career in development communications and want to work for a company like DAI, these are again, pretty basic, but it's really important to know your audience. And I've seen many times where, we're talking at people in different ways, but, my audience right now is different depending on the day that I'm, at work. Sometimes it's directly with the donor, with WHO. Sometimes it's with multilateral organizations like the World Bank, and who have a very specific mandate. And sometimes it's actually with the beneficiaries who are like, why is AMR even important to me in the first place? So I think it's really important to orient your message to whatever those objectives are. Now, for me, I work entirely in an international context. So for me, what guides my work is the Global Health Security Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. So any communication that I do related to my work, I really make sure I'm orienting it to those particular priorities that many countries are all working to achieve. Many countries, as well as many donor organizations like the US government or, foreign governments, the World Bank, WHO, FAO. And then I think it's really important to share successes and failures that are really people-centered and aligned to sort of donor-client priorities. My clients are principally the U.S. Agency for International Development, which is part of the U.S. State Department. It's its own independent agency, but they fund most of our work. And what's interesting is when you think about, or you poll people, and this is a sort of bipartisan issue, how much money do you think we spend in foreign assistance and international development? People think it's a huge amount of money. It's actually not a huge amount of money. And it's less than 1% of the federal budget. It's like I think it's 0.3%, 0.03%. Anyway, I don't know the exact number, but it's not a lot of money compared to other funding line items. And really, it's very hard for people to see these big investments that are happening in countries unless they see it at a sort of personal level. Like, how does it affect me in my country, or how is it affecting that one beneficiary who now has not done area? Or now has bed nets, and we've seen malaria elimination happen in a particular country. Well, how does that impact the society and the people who are in that society? And I think it's important to know your subjects. These are communities, or whether it's a particular policy priority, or you're working with a government agency, you really need to know who the subjects are. And I think what's really important, and there are many times where I've seen especially in One Health, because it is so multidisciplinary, and we can't just do this through physicians, public health practitioners, and veterinarians. We really need social scientists as well, and more of an increase in emphasis on social science, but really see yourselves as change agents, ethnographers, and advocates. I mean, the communications field is so pivotal to the work that we do, and to securing the funding that we need to advance this work, that we need to continue, to ensure that we're getting the message out, and that it's tight, and it's actually speaking to the correct audience. So that is my presentation. I have a lot of, I'm happy to take any questions when it's time for questions. I can talk to you about, some of the trials and tribulations of being a Peace Corps volunteer, or life after Peace Corps, or the adjustment of, working in a lower middle income countries. I mean, I think in the last 13 or so years, I've probably worked now in over 30 countries, which has been amazing. It's really been a wonderful experience for me. And honestly, I have to say, Peace Corps was the biggest risk, and really the most fun job that I'll ever really love. So I'll stop there, and thank you, Andrew, for that. Let me just stop sharing. Here we are. Thanks.
Thank you, Robert. I think we all enjoyed that. As you're thinking of questions for Robert, we're first going to hold off on those questions. We're going to transition over to Nick Sifuentes. So Nick has been behind tri-state transportation campaigns, victories on congestion pricing, the MTA's 5-borough bus network redesign and electrification of the full MTA bus fleet, New Jersey Transit Board reform legislation, and legislation to ensure New Jersey Transit converts to electric buses. He has been appointed to the New York State Transportation Advisory Panel to the Climate Action Council, implementing the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, New Jersey's Post-COVID Restart and Recovery Advisory Council, New York City's Post-COVID Surface Transportation Sector Advisory Council, and countless other initiatives. So welcome, Nick Sifuentes, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Drew. I'm really glad to be here, and good to meet all of you. So it's kind of funny. I mean, I do a lot of presentations in my life, but rarely am I talking about myself. So it feels a little self-aggrandizing. So I think what I'll do, though, is I did want to, talk a bit about my career path, how I got to what I'm doing now, and the sort of, myriad paths I took to get there. And then just a few of, like, for me, would have been lessons learned over the course of a career doing communications and advocacy work. So I'll walk through that, and then hopefully folks have questions, and very much looking forward to that. I don't have a slide deck. I thought I would just kind of talk casually, and hopefully be able to get to the questions part pretty quickly. So a little bit about my background. I went to UCLA, University of California at Los Angeles, for my undergrad, and I studied political science. And while I was there, I actually was particularly interested in doing legislation and policy formation. This is really where I, saw the arc of my career going. I very much was in the mindset of, I'm interested in some kind of a service-oriented career. Didn't really see myself as somebody doing direct service work. So, being a social worker, for instance, I have a lot of friends who are, but I, didn't think that was quite the path for me. I really wanted to get involved in legislation that could change lots of people's lives all at once. So after I graduated, I was planning on going to law school, and had gone through the whole process of taking the LSAT, getting into law school, et cetera. And then while I was in LA, I applied to work at a place called Lane, the Los Angeles Alliance for a New Economy. And what Lane does is they're an economic and racial justice nonprofit and advocacy organization in Los Angeles. So the work was very, very focused on trying to move people who are lower income and lower middle class into career track jobs that were middle and high wage jobs, often moving people into union pathways so that they'd be able to access the kinds of jobs that have excellent standards, a good wage, that allow people to actually have a family supporting kind of career. And we worked across a whole bunch of different sectors. We worked to make sure that we were creating pathways for Black and brown communities in South Los Angeles to access construction jobs that were, high wage union jobs. We did the same thing at the airport, Los Angeles, LAX. And we also did the same thing at the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach, among other places. So, a tremendous amount of work working with the city and county political apparatus, with labor unions, and with a wide network of partners at NGOs all across the state, really, to help produce programs that would move people into these pathways. And I give you all this background to say that, for me, as my very first role there, I was the communications lead for a bunch of our campaigns. That was really where I started getting my feet wet in the world of direct advocacy and the world of being able to actually create the kind of legislation that I was excited by. And I remember I faced this kind of point of decision where in the interview process at Lane, before they offered me the job, they said, I clearly hadn't locked down my social media well enough. Hey, so we see you're going to law school in a year. We're really looking for someone a little bit more long-term than that. And so I had this moment where I thought, okay, well, am I going to pursue the path of going, and getting a law degree to get into this advocacy and kind of legislation space, or do I want to kind of take a chance on this? So I kind of split the baby and deferred for a year, and then ended up loving that job so much that I decided, you know what, I don't need to do the law school route. I'm going to just not do that. And the fortunate thing was I don't know if folks remember, right around 2008 when the bottom kind of fell out of the legal sector. And that was when students were graduating with tremendous debt and couldn't find jobs in the field at all. So I feel like I really dodged a bullet. But more importantly for me, working at LA Alliance for New Economy kind of taught me everything that I know now about how to run smart advocacy campaigns. So the work that we did as communicators while we were there was always basically grounded in an advocacy context. That communications was part of our larger effort to run the kinds of campaigns that could change people's lives en masse if we got the policies, the programs, the laws passed that we were fighting for. And so communications was part of the work that we did, as well as a huge component that was research and policy development and direct community organizing. So I was housed with a bunch of other advocates in each of our campaigns, all of us in our separate but collective spaces, working on our various pieces of work. So I'm liaising with reporters, working really closely with developing the language and the tools that we're going to use to reach out into communities and actually convince them that what we're doing, will impact their lives on a daily basis. Working with the media to influence and put pressure on the elected officials that we needed to actually pass the laws and policies that we were pushing for, et cetera. And doing that in conjunction with working right next to our community organizers who are out in the field having those conversations every single day. And the research and policy people who were really responsible for writing the kind of language that we wanted to see enacted into law. And so for me, to see communication situated in that advocacy context was so powerful. And it's something that I've taken, I think, through the whole rest of my career. And something that I learned coming out of that is that, communications in that advocacy context is very contextual. Communications is in many ways, we talk about this as comms being kind of subsidiary to the larger policy goals that you're trying to achieve, right? So you have the policy, all of your comms is oriented around how does the work that you are doing and the language that you are using, all feed up into getting the policy passed. But the biggest lesson for me, I think, was that in a big sense, comms is policy. That the lessons that I was learning, the ways to be strategic, the fact that we were shaping the language that we were then using when we went and talked to city council people, when we were talking to state legislators, we were talking to regulators, that language that I was crafting was, in a sense, legislative language, was in a sense the research that we were doing did directly inform the way that we were intersecting with and chatting with the community members that we wanted to become parts of the program, so our direct organizing work. And so like comms, in the sense, even though it was kind of viewed as subsidiary to the larger policy work that we were doing, I could really quickly realize actually the communications work touches every single aspect of campaigns. And so that I think was a lesson that I've taken with me throughout the whole rest of my career. So I worked at Lane until I moved to New York City. So I was living in LA at the time and then moved to New York, where I started working for the Sierra Club. And there I ran communications for the Northeastern US for their Beyond Coal campaign. And that was a campaign transitioning off of coal plants and fossil fuels and onto clean and renewable energy. After working at Sierra Club, I went over to a private communications and PR firm called Berlin Rosen Public Affairs. They're one of a bunch of different public affairs firms all over that, you know, folks are probably familiar with a number of them. And while I was there, I was able to work on a whole range of client accounts. And for me, this is another big lesson in comms was, you know, the skill set that you develop as a communicator is one that translates to a whole range of fields. I had clients that were in the clean energy space because that was the work that I knew. I had clients who were, you know, labor and economic justice clients, but then I also did work on LGBT rights. I got to do work in arts and culture. You know, I got to do work in spaces that I had never played in before. And a big takeaway for me was that the lessons I had learned about how to be a good communicator, how to work with the press, how to develop compelling language really cuts across a whole range of issue spaces. And it didn't matter if I was doing advocacy to try and get an executive order passed through EPA and the Obama administration with Greenpeace, or, you know, we were writing language that we were using for funders for, you know, one of our clients who is a big modern arts foundation. The skill set was the same. And so for me, it gave me the confidence to know that, like, hey, as a communicator, I can switch gears and work in any number of spaces because the tools that we learn are really universal. So I worked at Berlin Rosen for a number of years, about 3.5 years. And then this is at a point in my career where I had done a lot of work in communications and realized that there were things that I loved about it, and then places that I found aspects of the job that I found very challenging. You know, one of the things that's the hardest thing about comms when you're doing direct PR work is, you know, there are a tremendous number of exogenous factors outside of your control, right? Does a reporter want to cover your issue that day? Are they compelled by what you're telling them? Do they have the space to do it at all? Does their editor approve the story? You know, all of those sorts of things play a huge role in your success as a communicator, especially when you're doing, you know, PR work for clients. And while I enjoyed it, there was a lot of stress because there was so much that was out of my control. And I had remembered the lessons I learned at Lane, that first job of mine, where, you know, comms can be so much a part of a broader advocacy campaign. So I ended up leaving Berlin Rosen and joining an organization called the Writers Alliance, which was organizing subway and bus riders in New York City to fight for better transit service in the region. And I actually joined as their deputy director. So I was overseeing not just all our communications work, but also our organizing team, the policy and legislative work that we were doing, and elements of fundraising, because we were a small nonprofit of like 8 or 9 people at that point. And when you're at a small nonprofit, you get to touch a little bit of everything if you have the right skill set for it. So I worked there as a deputy director for a number of years, and then moved over to an organization called Tri-State Transportation Campaign, where I was the executive director, running a nonprofit with a staff of 10, where we were working to improve transit, transportation, and infrastructure in the tri-state region, so New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. And while I was there, you know, we were able to work on billions of dollars of funding for the MTA, for New Jersey Transit, and systems throughout the region. We were able to secure electrification laws that are going to help move transportation, buses, yes, but also transportation writ large, into cleaner solutions like fully electric vehicles. And we worked on a number of laws, including something called Fair Fares, which created the first ever discount program in the Northeast for low-income riders to be able to access transit at dramatically reduced costs. So expanding access to the system for people who were often locked out of it, for whom a turnstile is a barrier, as we like to say. So I did that work for a number of years, and then just recently, so Andrew, your bio on me as of 2 weeks ago has changed. I now have moved over to the Energy Foundation, where I'm the program director for the Northeastern United States. And the Energy Foundation is a foundation that funds clean energy work across the United States and in a number of other countries around the world, our biggest being China. And we do about $130 million in funding annually. I'm in charge of the Northeastern United States' funding. So we fund a number of nonprofits throughout the region and also strategy for those nonprofits. So, coming from that very first job I had at Lane now to the Energy Foundation, my role is advising our grantees. We have a couple of hundred in the region on how best to do the work that they do. How do they do their communications? How do they do the lobbying? How do they do that grassroots organizing? And so on and so forth. And so, I think the thing that in my career, I'm most excited about is how communications, like I said at the outset, really cuts across all of these spheres of work. And so, it allows you to touch on so many different ways of doing advocacy, so many different ways of engaging with the public, that eventually the skill set is such that I found anyway, that allows you to be able to do that kind of grand strategy across, a whole range of work. So, I started graduating college really interested in doing policy work, and legislation, and thinking, law school was the only viable path to get there, and have found that actually communications really offers the exact same tool set that you need to know how to move legislation, convince policymakers of what needs to be done, and work with the general public and with the media to influence those policymakers and put the kind of pressure on them that brings them to the table. So I'll go ahead and stop there. I think, there's certainly a lot of takeaways that I've had in the work that I've done. But I think for me, the biggest thing that I'll mention that I have learned over the course of my career is, the importance of having a 5-year plan. So, I have always known that at some point I knew I wanted to do the legislative work that I was doing. And then I knew that I wanted to broaden my scope, which is why I went over to the Writers Alliance after doing straight comms for so many years. And then I knew that I really wanted to either go to a foundation or go into government, which led me to go over to the Energy Foundation. But also having your 5-year plan, but being flexible and really open to change, as opportunities come up, learning how to seize on those and see if they are the kinds of things that will take your career in the direction that you want to see it go. So I'll stop there, and Andrew, I'll kick it back to you and hopefully open it up to questions from folks.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Nick, and thanks, Rob. I gotta say, I haven't seen this group just kind of shake their head in affirmation to so many different things that we've been presented to over the course of the year. And I gotta hand it to the two of you for really finding something that hits or makes a note for every single person in the group. So thank you for that. We do have a small enough group tonight. I think we can, and I think we've been doing Zoom long enough that we're gonna try to just kind of let people speak up and ask questions. I know this cohort is definitely accustomed to it, so let's give that a go, and let's pepper Nick and Robert with some questions here while we've got the opportunity.
I have a question for Nick, if that's all right. So I know you're talking about transportation, like in the tri-state area and New Jersey. So I live in South Jersey. Did you work on any projects about like sustainable transportation or expanding transportation, especially out in more rural areas? I know between like in Gloucester County and Camden County, they're working on a speed rail, but
Yeah. That's a great question. So we worked on a couple of things in South Jersey. The first of those is we've done some work on the Gloucester County line that folks are really interested in seeing get done. And so the big question there is New Jersey Transit has perennially, like many transit agencies around the country, had dramatic shortfalls in the state funding that they receive. And the end result of that is New Jersey Transit has taken literally about $400 million a year out of their operating operating budget just to cover, or out of their capital budget, excuse me, out of the capital budget to cover just their operating expenses. So the money to pay for maintenance, to pay for drivers and engineers, et cetera, they're taking directly out of what would be money that would go towards expansion projects. And so one of the biggest things that we were fighting was to end those transfers and make sure that the Murphy administration in New Jersey was giving NJ Transit enough money so that they could actually run their operations and work on those expansion projects. And then the other big thing we've worked on is there's a network of biking, hiking, and walking trails called the Circuit Trails that are in and around the Philadelphia area. So it's about 500 miles of trail networks that actually connect to a large national trail network as well. So we've done a lot of work to build out those trails and expand on them so that people have access to, you know, these opportunities on the trails. And I know it sounds like it's just recreation, but we did two things to really make sure that it was about mobility as well. And that is making biking more feasible in and around Philadelphia and Trenton so that people could actually use bikes instead of needing cars. And then the second thing is expanding access, especially in low-income communities and BIPOC communities, so the trails weren't just something for like wealthy white folks, but something that everybody had access to, both for health and mobility, and also, you know, for commuting too.
Thank you. Yeah, I noticed that. One more thing. So did you work with Nick Pittman or Nor'easter Nick? Because I saw him work a lot with the train stuff as like an advocate speaking.
Interesting. I don't know Nick Pittman. We had a specific staffer, Sonia Sesna, who does all of our South Jersey work. I wouldn't be surprised if she's worked with him, but she lives in Trenton and she led all of our South Jersey work while I was at Tri-State.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, Michelle, go ahead.
So thank you to both of you. Both are amazing men. I sent a little note to Andrew and said that, and they're obviously you're his friends too. So kudos on such a cool friend. You have Andrew, he has you. It's excellent. But I wanted to ask both of you sort of different questions. So Nick, I kind of wanted to know, your job sounded so cool in New York, almost like you could have gone on to be the MTA guy, right? So why did you pivot to the job that you did? Was it because you wanted to do global work? And that's a question for you. And then the question for Robert is, like, you've been at DAI for such a long time, and that's such a very cool organization. I know I've done development work, and I know a lot of people that work in development, and they're very corporate, right? Like DII is like the good one to work for. It's like a very good company. So how did you survive in that company for 15 years? Like, you know, those are not easy organizations. Yeah, seriously, like those are not easy organizations to work for. So how do you recommend, because I'm sometimes not the most political person. So what is your, Dr. J is laughing. What is your strategy for navigating those organizations? So those are my two questions.
Robert, do you want to start and then I'll answer?
Yeah, sure. It's funny that you say that. Why? How have I managed to be at DAI for so long? And sometimes I ask myself that same question. It's very atypical, especially in the development industry, and for someone who's my age and usually, you know, job hop. I think for me, DAI is a place where I've always been able to take an idea, test it, and take it to scale. And they've been very open to experimentation and really open to, you know, I mean, I started there glossy-eyed, rose-colored glasses from Peace Corps. I didn't know anything about development as a business. And so it was really wild for me to understand, you know, how does a company that was founded by Peace Corps volunteers 45 years, you know, 50 years ago, how do they develop this model that sustained itself so long and is so profitable that we actually deliver for our clients? And we're all very much like-minded, because I thought, you know, for profit, not for profit, you know, what is that tension? And really what I think in our organization is, like, you know, because we are for profit and we look at things from a, you know, how well can we do? Are we going to be able to deliver on this with the price that we've set forth? We take really calculated risks. And I think everyone is in it for, you know, in it to win it. I mean, we are really a fun group of people to work with. So I think that's part of it. And the other is, just people. The people at DAI are pretty awesome. And I've been able to have many jobs. I mean, I think I've been there, 14 years. I've worked had like maybe 7 or 8 jobs. And now I'm at the sort of senior director level, just underneath the VP. And, the trajectory could very well take me to that, step. Is it going to be at DAI? I don't know. But I'm hopeful. I think it's been very exciting. And yeah, so it's the people, it's the ability to iterate and take risks and them encouraging it, I think. And the ethos of being employee owned is kind of exciting to me. That answered your question.
And so one, I really appreciate your question, and I appreciate the the implication that one day I could run the MTA. I'm not sure I have quite the skill set to take something like that on, but yeah, I mean, I think for me, so going back to the whole concept of 5-year plans that I talked about earlier, when I was running Tri-State, which is, a small nonprofit, we had a staff of 10 and a budget of just over $1 million a year. And, as an executive director in a small nonprofit, my work was literally everything. I was doing all our communications work with our communications person that we had on staff, and also, doing a lot of the writing of our reports, but also doing all of our fundraising and, also cutting all the checks. So, you have to be able to pivot and do lots of different things. And, I think for me, what happened was I had this 5-year plan where I knew I wanted to go in one of two directions. I wanted to go into the foundation world, or I wanted to go into government. And so the odd thing that happened to me in September was I kind of had both things on the table at the same time. I had the Energy Foundation reach out to me and ask if I was interested in becoming the program director for the Northeast. And I also, about a month and a half later, the Biden-Harris transition team reached out to see if I was interested in roles at USDOT. And so I kind of had this, oh man, both things that I wanted are literally in front of me right now. What do I do with this? And obviously, spoiler alert, I went to Energy Foundation. And then the reason that I made that call personally was, I'm interested in seeing where I can have the most impact. And so looking at the various options on the table, I mean, I genuinely feel that we have, 2 big issues of the day in front of us as a society. Or the first of those is dealing with, structural racism. And the second of those is dealing with climate change. Both of which are, I think, in big ways existential. And going to USDOT or staying at Tri-State and using that as a stepping stone to, maybe join the MTA or, work my way into state governance. The challenge there is, I think it's the right decision for a lot of folks. But I saw myself as being able to have more direct and immediate impact going to a foundation that one, does a lot of grant making across the region on what I think was the biggest issue of the day, but also like the fact that the ability for me to then take all of the lessons that I think I've learned over my career and how to be a strategist and a smart communicator and a policy person and use that to then advise nonprofits on how to do their work. I refer to it when I was talking to the Volks Energy Foundation as a force multiplier. It's like I can take a skill set that I have and do that full time for lots of different folks. And to me, that felt like now that we're doing work in, 12 states plus DC, it felt like this is a way of being able to take what I think I can do pretty well at this point and bring that skill set to like hundreds of different people all at once. And maybe that sounds, like I said earlier, a little self-aggrandizing, but, I kind of thought like, oh, here's the thing I think I do well. Let me see if I happen to be right and I can take that skill and hopefully bring it as a tool for lots of different groups and people to use. So we'll see if I'm right. I'm only 3 weeks into the job, but I'm hopeful that this is a way of being able to, to really make an impact on something that I see as a really pressing issue.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, particularly as we're all about to be, if not already, applying for jobs, when you're looking at resumes, or cover letters, what are the kinds of key phrases that let you know, okay, this person can do this work, this person has a strong sense of communication strategy? Are there things that you look for that kind of tune you into that?
That's a great question. We just at EF hired a regional communications director. And just for folks to be aware, we also have another regional communications role opening up in the Midwest, literally in like a week. So, if you're interested, keep your eyes peeled. I think, what I'm looking for, and as part of the hiring process for that role, what we were specifically looking for is, we wanted to see somebody who had the background and skill set technically to be able to do the work. So I wanted to know, is this somebody who understands how to write an op-ed, an LTE, who knows how to pitch a reporter, who understands what it looks like to draft a communications plan, who knows how to write talking points, and understands how to put themselves in the shoes of the people that you're actually trying to reach, right? Like, we all know that one of the key tools in communications is going where people are and then, kind of taking them by the hand and pulling them further. So I needed to know, and we wanted to make sure that we were hiring somebody who understood what it means to talk to, not just liberals who already understand the issue of climate change, but like, how do you have conversations with people who are rural voters in the middle of Pennsylvania, for whom climate change and sea level rise is like not a real thing that they're concerned with? How do we talk to, Republicans and folks who are conservative and try to get them to see, the issues that we're working on as something that they really should be voting in favor of? So can you put yourself in that mindset and write the kinds of messages that are compelling to those audiences? And that was definitely something that, we looked for in people's resumes and cover letters to see, do you have that understanding, that strategy, and that skill set? And that was one of the key questions we asked in the interviews too. We really wanted to make sure people knew how to talk to diverse audiences and do it well. And then another big priority for us, and I think this is something that I've seen across the entire advocacy space right now, is the focus on DEI. So the focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and really making sure that candidates understand what it means to be able to work with diverse constituencies and to actually, make sure that those constituencies are driving the work. The people who are most affected by climate change oftentimes are BIPOC communities. And we need to make sure that we don't just know how to work with those communities, but we understand what it means to take a back seat and let them lead. And so that was a real priority for us in our search as well. And so that means, as a person of color who's done a lot of work in communities of color, that's something that, has been an intrinsic part of my career. But for folks who are allies, it's just as much the case that you can understand how to do that kind of work, do it well, and know when to step back. And that was another really key thing I think that we were looking for in candidates for that job.
I would just add too that I think for DAI, when we're looking at applications related to communications or policy advocacy, we'd want to see individuals who have a skill set that allows them to translate really complicated materials or complicated content into more digestible, accessible language for policymakers and for beneficiaries. And then I think the second that I would add is, if for example, you're working on a $30 million program in Liberia, and you're tasked with developing the communications and outreach strategy and advocacy strategy, you have to be a facilitator too. And I think that facilitation skill is so valuable and so underrepresented in development. I think we need to see more folks who have strong people-centered facilitation skills.
And Rosie, I'll add one more thing really quickly. It's a little bit afield from your question, but the interview process I think is also so important. And I have sat through in my time a lot of terrible interviews and a lot of great interviews. And one of the things that I love when somebody comes in and they do signposting. So when they tell us, okay, in answering your question, I'm going to tell you about this, this, and this. So people who are able to sort of guide me through how they're going to answer the question that I have just asked them is really helpful, especially in a good communicator. I literally want to hear that in an interview. So somebody who can signpost and really say, okay, well, you've asked me this question, great. I'm going to tell you 1, 2, and 3. Here I go. That I think has been something that really stands out to me in a good interviewee. And there was another point that I was going to make and it flew right out of my head. So if it comes back, I will circle back to it.
In the meantime, Michelle, you had your hand up.
I don't want to take away from anybody else who has a question, because that's asking twice. Does anybody else have a question?
Go ahead.
Okay. So Robert, you were talking about facilitation skills. So I have a lot of my background is in education and communications, and then I've also lived overseas for a long time. So I do have like this mix of skills, but I'm a little bit older and my education skills kind of dominate my resume. So it's hard for me because I want to get that job, right? To translate those skills to exactly what you're talking about. So I mean, I want to sell myself as like a consultant. I can, I'm an educator, so I can do the facilitation, but it hasn't specifically been in the context in the development world the way that they want it. So how can I translate that and get in the door the way that I want to get in the door? As not like a new graduate, right? I'm an older student. It's my second master's. Right? Okay, so that's.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. And I see and interview people a lot who have had different, career trajectories and maybe not so straight and linear and really different stories and narratives. I mean, I think there are competency-based resumes or CVs that you can really highlight how, what competencies you have with respect to facilitation, and maybe not even in LMIC setting, developing country setting, but in the classroom, and how you can translate adult education or concepts in adult education to development practice. I think that's really important too. But we see a range of applicants at DAI for many positions. And I mean, they're often, very technical in a specific area of work, governance or public health or something, working in conflict and humanitarian relief. So you want to have some experience there, but as a communications expert, I think that's one thing I would say. And the second is, competency based. And the second would be to consider, where your skills in taking knowledge and translating knowledge into action. So, knowledge management, how do you take information that's happening on a project, collate it, understand the sort of patterns and trends, and then use that to communicate results. I think that is the crux of what we need to do better in development. And at DAI, I mean, Chatham House rules, I would say, we really don't do a good good enough job about it. I mean, I had a meeting today where we need a boot camp on writing, get people to, cut through the bullshit and be more concise and really, speak. How do you speak to a client? You have to be very concise in your ask. And so I think this is something that permeates all parts of our work. Yeah, so I don't know if I answered your question or I went off on a tangent, but I'll stop there.
Anyone else? Anything else on anyone's mind that they want to jump in with? Yeah, Dahlia, go ahead.
So I do have a question about the diversity of the staff. So the question is for Nick or Robert. So how often do you focus on of adding diversity in the staff? And how much do you think it affects on your work, let's say on international level, especially that, Robert, you mentioned that you worked with Pakistan, Syria, and Iraq, and other countries, like other communities. So how often do you focus on the diversity of the staff, and how do you think it affects working with international communities?
Yeah, I think that's great. Great question. Diversity, I mean, and really equity in all that we do. I mean, we have a racial and social justice initiative that's been kicked off, in the last year. That's really guiding. We're doing an institutional analysis to sort of understand where our gaps are. But at a country level, I mean, so there's corporate level and then there's project level. We have 5,000 staff all over the world. 100 and 200 or so are based here in, the DMV, the DC metro area. And I think we do have a fairly diverse corporate staff. I think we have a really diverse executive team. So a lot of women, which is amazing to see. Half of our executive team are all women. We have several people of color. There's, our executive vice president is LGBT community. So I think we definitely embrace openness. And I think at the country level, the key to sustainability is really working through local organizations and institutions. And so I always like to say that I lead from behind. You know, in Pakistan, we have a fully Pakistani staff, and so we want to make sure that they are, you know, leading the development of this program and really leading the work. I advise and come in and support, and I think this is something I learned in Peace Corps, is whenever you're working in a, you know, if I'm working at a community level in, you know, a rural community in Uganda, I'm not there to be the, you know, white Mzungu from the north to tell you how to do your work better. I'm here to learn from you. So I always take the sort of posture of, you know, I'm Robert, this is my expertise, but really you're the expert, and I'm really here to understand, you know, what needs you have and really how best I can support them. So I think that sort of guides my approach. And I think as an organization, we definitely, you know, we have a responsibility to promote inclusion and diversity, and we do that very well.
And I think that's a fantastic question. It has always been a focus in the organizations that I have worked in. I think when I was at Lane, our work in BIPOC communities meant that a lot of our hiring was focused on folks from those communities. And, you know, I think that was certainly true when I led Tri-State Transportation Campaign. My entire senior staff were women. You know, we had a very diverse staff, and that was very important to us. And now at Energy Foundation, so the environmental movement has traditionally been challenged by exactly this issue of diversity. Money and the largest organizations have traditionally been centered in very white, oftentimes not very environmental justice focused movements. And over the last several years, there's been a huge shift. It started about 5 years ago. It accelerated last year after the George Floyd protests. And I think that the environmental movement is really having a reckoning right now with itself about what it means to be diverse and to really center the importance of BIPOC communities in the work. So at EF, for instance, through this hiring process that we've been going through, you know, we're really committed to always having 50% of our candidates be diverse. That often means racially diverse. It can also mean gender, and gender expression too. But that's critical to the work we do. And when I was at Tri-State, and I've seen this now at EF, if we don't have a diverse candidate pool, it means we failed. Somewhere we screwed up. We didn't reach out to the right constituencies. We didn't tap the right networks. We didn't get the job out far enough to get, you know, a wider pool of people to apply than just, you know, kind of the standard folks that you would expect to see in the environmental movement. So I think it's become more central to the work, in part because a lot of folks doing the work have realized, oh, we've screwed this up a lot and it's time for us to do better. And so it's an evolving process right now, I think, in the environmental space and the advocacy world generally. But I think it's a lot of people working with intention to try and do better.
Thank you.
And Robert and Nick, thank you both for dropping your email in there. I've got a couple private messages here. I think you're definitely going to be hearing from some folks about just reaching out, working with you, and some potential opportunities for the future. I know that everyone here is looking forward to that. We've got 1 minute left. And one thing I forgot to mention in Nick's bio that I want to kind of make sure we highlight here is that he's one of the few people I know that's taken on Andrew Cuomo and won on the other side of that. So congratulations for that one.
I've known for years that he sucks. I'm glad everybody else is finally catching on.
So we're pushing up right up against 9 o'clock here. One last chance. If there's anything burning on anyone's mind that they want to ask either of these two gentlemen, now's your chance. So I'll give 3 seconds of silence here to give you an opportunity to speak up. All right. So Robert and Nick, thank you very much for taking time away from your evening to join us tonight. We appreciate this. And like I said, I saw a lot of heads nodding in approval during everything that you guys were both saying. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for helping us out. And thank you for agreeing to continue to be in touch here with everyone. Have a good night. And we'll.
Can I say one more thing? Maybe they should send their emails.
It's in the chat right now.
Oh, it's in the chat? Okay.
Yep,
Okay.
and I'll forward again through email after
Okay,
this.
perfect.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody. Glad
Thank
to
you
be
so
here.
much.
Thank you.
Great session, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you.